Our today's topic is legislature. What is a legislature? That's the basic question. A legislature is actually a deliberative assembly with the authority to make laws for a political entity such as country or state. Legislatures form important parts of most governments, and in the separation of power model, they are often contrasted with the executive and judicial branch of the government. How it evolved. In early societies, there was no clear-cut concept of legislation, as tradition and usages were regarded the most effective regulative force, and the supreme law-making authority was the ruler. So his commandments were the sole power and the most effective regulative force. And the people, they were practicing some traditions, they were following some usages, and this was the most effective regulative force, as traditions, norms, they are considered as a source of law later on when the legislation got organization in the modern states. The principle of representation was, however, introduced in the organization of European Parliament during the medieval ages. Certain trusted persons were appointed as members of the parliaments to help the rulers in statecraft and in the collection of taxes. Some trustworthy people, they were appointed as the advisor, as the members of the parliament, and there were supportive, you can say that supportive group who were actually, they were the supporting members, and their job was to help the rulers in running the affairs of the state and in the collection of taxes. And the vested interest got representation of the French Revolution. So the people of a certain agenda, they got representation in the government, in the legislation. And the modern legislatures, they were originally established in Europe during the 19th century. What's the organization and procedure of the modern day legislature? What should be the total strength? What should be the tenure? What should be the basis of representation? So generally, legislative assemblies are given power to enact laws, and then this is the primary responsibility of the legislature. And they enact laws according to the constitutional law. And in assemblies, these are considered the mirror of the nation. So that's why it is advisable to fix the number of their members as to ensure proper representation of all interest and all shades of public opinion. So everyone get representation in the legislations to ensure that all people, they get representation, and they put their contribution or their opinion in the legislation. So it is necessary that all the inhabitants or the citizens, they vote and they get the representation in the parliament, in the legislature. What's the tenure? The second important issue in this regard is the fixation of its tenure. It should neither be too short to make it difficult for the members to get acquainted with the legislative routine, nor the period should be so long that those conditions are completely changed under which the members were elected. The tenure must be sufficient enough that the people who are elected, they get acquainted with the legislative routine, that how laws are made, what are the legislative procedures, and it shouldn't be too long that in that prolonged period the two conditions are totally changed. So there is a particular certain environment where people are elected, and in that when the people are elected for a prolonged period, so definitely it might frustrate the population, and it might deprive the people to represent their aspiration and will. What should be the basis of representation? So definitely it is the popular basis of representation, and it's an only a recent development in respect of the organization of legislature. So people, they do vote, and in most of the modern states people are given the right to vote on the basis of adult suffrage, that when someone get the age of majority, like 18 years, so he is given a right to vote. And what are the roles and functions of a representative? An important question regarding the basis of representation is whether a deputy is supposed to be spokesman of his constituency only, or that of the nation as a whole. According to one version, he is supposed to be the spokesperson of the voters, because he his sole function is to satisfy his voters by all means. So definitely in future he needs their support for re-election, and people have elected them to represent their aspiration or their wishes. And this type of representation is called instructed representation, because the voters of that particular constituency instruct their representative on certain matters. And the other variant, that he is regarded as a nominee of a particular party, and that's why he is considered as a spokesman of his party, and he is supposed to safeguard party interest and honor its decisions while performing his functions in the legislative chambers. And this type of representation is called uninstructed representation. What's the function of legislature? And modern legislators, they perform a variety of functions depending to a larger extent on the nature of political system. Some of the functions are commonly performed by all the legislators, such as to enact laws according to the needs of the circumstances, to pass appropriation and finance bills, and undertake discussion on national issues. Mostly, the legislatures have a say in the amendment of the Constitution, in addition to performance of some administrative and selective functions. So the basic and the primary function of a legislator is to enact laws, to make laws. But in the parliament, they pass some appropriation, some resolutions, and they contribute in passing the finance bills, and they undertake discussion on national issues. The nature and form of government is an important determinant to this effect. The functions of a legislature under a parliamentary setup are slightly different from the one performed under a presidential form of government. So their discussions and their functions, they might be different, because in the parliamentary system the executive is part of the legislature and they are held accountable to the legislatures. So in presidential system there is a complete separation of power, so their functions and is quite different, because the nature and the formation of government is very much different. The powers and the function of a modern legislature, the first one we said that it is the legislation. The primary function, that is to enact laws and to make alterations in the previous ones according to the requirements of changing circumstances. So laws, they are meant to constantly change, because the circumstances changes, so definitely new laws are required. So that's why the parliament, they make laws and they changes laws as well according to the requirement. Then the amending the constitution, the legislators, they got the power to amend the constitution, and as the constitution is considered as the supreme body of the principles, and a specific majority is required for amending the constitution. Just to pass a new law, the parliament needs a simple majority, but for the amendment of the constitution they need two-third majority. Then the administrative control, this is another power that all the legislatures, they perform administrative function as well. In some parliamentary systems, executive is part of legislature, as the latter forms and control the cabinet. In the parliamentary system, the legislature is actually the people who are part of the executive, they are part of the legislature as well. And these legislatures, they get the control of the cabinet as well, because they are part of that. And parliamentarians exercise their control effectively through criticizing the administrative policies, asking questions from ministers, passing resolutions and joint resolutions, moving different motions, and finally through passing the vote of no confidence. And the fourth one is control over finance. Legislature in the modern state is regarded as the custodian of the purse of the nation. Without its consent, no tax can be imposed nor money spent. So wherever the budget is passed in the parliament, so it is mandatory that it must get passed from the parliament. And so this is how the legislature, they got the control over finance. So whenever the government wants to impose a tax, so it needs that bill must be passed by the parliament, by the legislature. So without the consent of the legislature, the government cannot impose any tax. And the judicial powers, most modern legislature, they have some judicial powers as well. They can call in any person, any government official, and they can ask questions regarding that particular job, और उसको बुला सकते हैं. जैसे आज हमारे पास वो पब्लिक अकाउंट्स कमेटी है, मुख्तलिफ कायमा कमेटीज़ हैं, तो वो उनको बुलाकर उसके ख़िलाफ़ कोई भी फैसला सुना सकते हैं. And then as source of political awareness, like debates and discussions among elected members of legislation not only provide awareness but also educate the masses regarding political issues. So whenever the discussion or debate is going on in the parliament, so different views, different opinions, so people are get awareness from that, and through these debates and discussions by the legislators, it educates the people and on many political issues. And then ventilation of the grievances. Like the members of legislatures perform an important function of ventilation of grievances of the people through different parliamentary forums. They can criticize the policies of the government, ask questions, and pass resolutions. So the some provinces, some states, some members of the parliament, so definitely they might be in a position like where they feel that they have some grievances. So these members of the legislatures, they represent those aggrieved parties, and they can criticize the policies of the government, and they can ask the questions regarding that particular policies, and they can pass the resolutions. Now the formation, like it should be the unicameral or the bicameral. There must be a single house, or there must be two houses. Which one is good? Like the unicameral parliament is okay, or there must be a bicameral. So let's see that a unicameral legislature consists of one chamber, while bicameral legislature has two chambers, known as upper and lower. Tenure. The tenure of the upper chamber is generally a bit longer as compared to that of the lower ones. It's a bit longer because they are representing the federating units, so that's why they are given a longer period of time. Like in Pakistan, the member of the upper house, the Senate, he is elected for 6 years. And the qualification, comparatively higher qualification are prescribed for the membership of the upper chambers, like that a person must be of more than of 35 years of age. And the utility of an ideal upper chamber lies in the support or assistance it extends to the popularity elected chamber. Lord Bryce, while prescribing the functions and role of an ideal upper chamber, remarks that it should review the bills coming from the lower chamber and return these along with its proposal. The upper chamber, it plays a vital role. Like whatever the bills which are generated from the lower chamber, it is the responsibility of the upper house to review them and then return them. If in lower chamber, the basis of representation is the population, is the popular representation, and the whole state territory is divided into electoral districts in different constituencies, equal to the number of seats to be filled on the basis of equal population. Like according to the population, this representation is divided. Like in Pakistan, about 7 to 8 lakh people, they get representation in the parliament, in the National Assembly. The Balochistan. What are advantages and disadvantages of unicameral legislature? Check on absolutism. So by superior membership, like the member of the upper chamber are generally superior in quality because they are of uh, older ages with some experience, and they are highly educated, and they are very much familiar with the democratic values. And the composition of bicameral legislature therefore combines the proper representation of the popular will and that of the talent. So the bicameral legislature, so the popular will, where the people, the member of the lower chamber, they didn't have any experience, but the upper chamber, the people are having more qualification, highly educated, and very much familiar with democratic values. So when the composition, like the popular, let's see what are the advantages of unicameralism. Number one is that this is a very simple procedure. The organization of unicameral legislature is quite simple. The responsibility of legislation is not divided, and it can clearly be located in one chamber only. And in bicameral legislature, so there is a possibility of perpetual disagreement for asserting more powers in both legislature chambers. So if one party is having a majority in the upper house, and the other party is having majority in the lower house, the lower chamber, so definitely there is a possibility of perpetual disagreement, that they disagree on each and every bill. So it it might take a lot of time. It might be the uh, wastage of resources, wastage of time. So when there is a unicameral legislature, so the simplicity is there, as the legislation is clearly located in one chamber. And popular system. Many political theorists have appraised this system, hence many countries adopted it. Like unicameral system of legislature has remained very popular in the composition of private corporations. It was due to growing popularity of this system that changes were initiated even in the structure of bicameralism. So many countries, they have adopted it, and they consider that it is the more easier one, and it is very popular one. And the bicameralism, the France in France there is a unicameral unicameral legislature. So all laws are made in one house, in one chamber. and the concentration of responsibility that lies in a unicameral legislature. The argument presented in support of bicameralism regarding the so-called useful role of upper chambers in revising bills and assisting the lower legislature chamber is based on exaggerated account. They say that the upper chamber plays a vital role. There are seasoned or qualified people in the upper chamber and they revise the bill, but they say that it is very much exaggerated. So if the lower chamber is playing its role efficiently, I think it's very much there, and it's quite simple, and the whole responsibility is concentrated in one chamber. The quality of bills. The assumptions that bills are not thoroughly discussed in the lower legislature chamber is based on exaggerated account. The lawmaking procedures, they are completely followed by the lower chamber, the members of the lower chambers. So the presence of more than one chambers of legislation can then increase disagreement and confusion. So if there are two houses, so definitely there will be a disagreement, there will be a confusion. And if it is said that these bills are not discussed on the lower chamber, so I think this is not a good thing to say. It's not a right thing to say, because every bill is discussed in detail on the lower chamber, and it is less expensive. The unicameral legislature is less expensive. And Bentham says that in case of agreement and uniformity in approach between both chambers, the presence of second legislature chamber becomes useless, and it produces nothing except duplication. Like when the one chamber is doing a job properly, then there is no need of the upper chamber. And it is argued that the attitude of upper chamber of legislature is generally conservative, and it proves hurdle in the ways of progressive legislation. So the upper chamber, it always creates hurdles. So it creates disagreement. It increases disagreement and confusion. So that's why the unicameral legislature is less expensive and more effective. If you have any question, so you can ask, or you can email me one.